This channel is part of the History Hit network.
Today, the Egypt of the modern world looks upon the wonders of its ancient past. Undimmed by the passing centuries, such eternal splendors of the pyramids at Giza and the Great Sphinx still stand as breathtaking tributes to Egypt's ancient forefathers. Perhaps they are a little beaten and battered by the hot desert winds and the burning sun, but these treasures still endure like the endless sands which have helped preserve them for thousands of years. The ancient civilization which spawned such awesome structures continues to fascinate us. It contains an irresistible mix of splendor and mystery. And at that civilization's very heart were the mighty pharaohs, the great kings of the 30 dynasties, whose lives were revealed to us through the discovery of their splendid and opulent tombs. Perhaps the most extraordinary pharaoh of all was the great warrior King Ramses II, remembered simply as Ramses the Great. The lifeblood of the ancient Egyptian civilization was the river Nile. It nourished here people and gave them the raw materials they needed to make their extraordinary achievements. Cutting a swathe through the desert from its source in the Nile-Orongo River, a tributary of Lake Victoria, it flows to the delta on the Mediterranean coast, a journey of nearly 6,500 kilometers. It was the ancient Greek historian Herodotus who declared that Egypt is the gift of the Nile. Together with the sun, it was perceived by the ancient Egyptians to be the very source of life.
The Nile was for them like a huge clock that organized their world. And that's why they had to watch out for it. That's why they had to think in the way of the Nile and the agricultural cycle. That's why when you talk about spring, summer, autumn and winter, you don't find that in ancient Egypt. You find in ancient Egypt inundation, the coming out of the plants, and the so-called summer, 3 seasons.
Watch hundreds of exclusive history documentaries with a subscription to History Hit. Our goal is to bring you award-winning documentaries that cover the events and figures that have shaped our world all in one place. Learn more about the wonderful and mysterious world of the ancients with History Hit. Follow us as we take you around some world-famous sites, including Pompeii and the stunning temple complex at Karnak. We also aim to bring you the stories and legends that shaped our world through our award-winning podcast network. Sign up now for a free trial, and Odyssey fans get 50% off their first 3 months. Just be sure to use the code Odyssey at checkout.
I think that a lot of the reasons why Egypt was able to remain a dominant world power for so long can ultimately be ascribed to geographical factors. If you think about the geography of Egypt, it has a lot of very strong natural boundaries, the Mediterranean in the north, the rocky cataracts of the Nile in the south, and the deserts to the east and west. And these boundaries are pretty impregnable, which can obviously has effects on internal consolidation. So Egypt is able to be a stronger power internally than a lot of other countries which don't have these natural geographical boundaries.
The greater part of ancient Egyptian society was made up of simple peasant folk who scratched a meager living from the vast plains that surround the River Nile. Although the land was fertile, they lived on a diet of coarse wheat bread, beans and figs, and like all civilizations of the ancient world, mortality rates were high. How these humble people must have gazed in awe at the cream of Egyptian society, those who frequented the royal court. The royal court was made up of the heads of various administrative offices, such as the treasury, the judiciary, and the diplomatic service. Standing above these dignitaries in the social order was the vizier or prime minister. But the great figure who ruled over all was the pharaoh, the all-powerful head of the people.
There are just over 170 pharaohs, but there's one who stands literally head and shoulders above the others, the name that everybody knows, Ramses II.
The word pharaoh originally meant royal palace, and it was not until around 1580 BC that it came to refer to the ruler who lived inside. These potentates were venerated by their people as descendants of the gods, as supreme mortals, and on occasion they even earned a godlike aura for themselves, and none more so than Ramses the Great. It was in 1269 BC that he assumed the great double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt.
The kingdom of Upper and Lower Egypt, the unified kingdom, is one of the greatest in the ancient world. The unification is actually symbolized by two crowns. The pharaoh had a red crown, which was for Lower Egypt, which is the area of the delta, and the white crown, which is a tall conical crown, for Upper Egypt, which is really from Cairo down to Aswan. And then he could put the two crowns together to be the king of Upper and Lower Egypt. They sat one within each other, and he's often shown in the reliefs and the statuary in this fashion, thereby the iconography, the emblem of the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, of the two kingdoms.
Ramses the Great took the throne name of User-Matre-Setep-Enre, which means the justice of Re is powerful, chosen of Re. His elaborate name was a direct reference to Re, the sun god, the most omnipotent of all the Egyptian gods. Ramses the Great was born in 1304 BC into the 19th dynasty of Egyptian kings, the son of Seti I and the grandson of Ramses I. The 19th dynasty ruled during a phase of Egyptian history known as the New Kingdom. Spanning the years between 1580 BC and 1090 BC, the New Kingdom is generally held by historians to have been the golden age of the ancient Egyptian civilization.
The New Kingdom lasted for a very long time. We know it's almost 500 years. And as you know, its dynasties from 18 to 20. It was a new landmark in the history of ancient Egypt. They founded for the first time in their history, in their long history, an empire. Egypt, again, for the first time became from or transferred from being a local power into an international power. She had a role to play in Africa, in the Sudan, in East Africa, in the ancient Near East, and even in the Eastern Mediterranean. This had its own reflections and its own results. For the first time, the Egyptians opened up on the outside world. I don't know exactly how did they feel then, but at the beginning they must have had what you can call a cultural shock. For the first time, the Egyptians were so cocooned within themselves, they must have felt that there were other nations, other cultures, other peoples, other languages, and they were not less than themselves.
It was a period which saw many pharaohs leave their indelible mark on the pages of history. Rulers such as Tuthmosis, Hatshepsut, Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, and Ramses. It was during the reign of King Seti I that Egypt saw the first beginnings of the bold new foreign policy, which included famous military expeditions against both Syria and Lebanon.
Seti I's father had been a very short-lived king called Ramses I, and they began the 19th dynasty, the pharaohs, the military pharaohs, if you like. And so father and grandfather of Ramses II were great military men. They were at the top of the tree in ancient Egypt. They were generals. His inheritance was, I suppose one would say, from a military family. And he had the backing of courtiers who'd served under his father. And he had the knowledge of his kingdom and what lay beyond it, so that he could then go forward and make the great empire that became Egypt of the 19th dynasty.
However, a more lasting tribute to the reign of King Seti were to be the magnificent buildings that he constructed, which included the Hypostyle Hall in the Temple of Amun at Karnak and the remarkable temples at Abydos. The young Ramses became the focus of attention at court when Seti's only other son died, leaving him heir apparent to the throne. The young prince was therefore given the new title of eldest king's son at the age of only 10, and thereafter the formative years of his teens were spent almost exclusively in the company of his father, the perfect preparation for his future role as king. Ramses certainly shared his father's enthusiasm for building, a passion that would characterize his own later years as pharaoh. While still a young prince, he not only supervised the construction of his father's temples, but also commissioned one of his own to be built to the god Osiris at Abydos.
Ramses II, the great Ramses, succeeded his father Seti I in 1279 BC, and so therefore he finished building his father's temple, and that's why on the pilasters in front of us we see not Seti but Ramses himself being greeted by all the different gods, and of course underneath each representation there are the titles of Ramses and his name in his cartouche.
the aging Seti seems to have appreciated his son's outstanding qualities, for, perhaps sensing that his own end was near, he appointed Ramses co-regent during the last year of his reign. The young prince recalled the thrill of his unexpected promotion, which brought him riches of a very different kind. "The All-Lord himself made me great while I was a child. Until I reigned, I was installed as eldest son, as hereditary prince upon the throne of Geb. Seti said, 'Crown him as king, that I may see his beauty while I live with him.' He equipped me with women, a royal harem, as beautiful as those of the palace. Those of the south and north were under my feet." The harem is perhaps one of the most enduring images of ancient Egypt. For in those far-off days, the pharaoh's exalted position allowed him a choice of women, and of course, a selection of different wives. What thoughts, therefore, spun round the head of young Ramses as the harem girls and exotic dancers were brought before him to bewitch him with their shapely charms? But for all his achievements as a builder of magnificent temples, it is probably Ramses' victories on the field of battle which are best remembered by history, and which most earned him the epitaph, Great. During his long reign, he procured a formidable reputation as a warrior, a fact borne out by contemporary depictions, such as the one seen here. The mighty pharaoh is holding a group of cowering Asiatic prisoners by the hair, in readiness to behead them with his axe. During his early years, Ramses had accompanied his father on campaigns against the Hittites in Syria. Since that time, the Hittites had retained control of the northern parts of Syria, most notably the city of Kadesh, while Egypt exercised her major influence over the more southern regions. But within 4 years of Ramses' accession to the throne in 1292 BC, a revolt in the Levant forced him to mobilize his troops in order to put the insurrection down. In the spring of 1275 BC, with a force of some 20,000 men under his command, Ramses led his men up through the Gaza Strip to an encampment west of the city of Kadesh. The site was originally chosen on the basis of information extracted from 2 unfortunate spies, which suggested that the Hittite army was at a base 100 miles to the north of the city. But when 2 more Hittites were captured by Ramses' army, they confirmed under torture that Ramses had in fact been led into a trap. The enemy was actually on the other side of Kadesh, preparing an ambush for the Egyptian forces. Although the Egyptian army was greater in number, the Hittite army, led by their king Muwatallis, was even greater. 37,000 men, plus 2,500 chariots, were now ranged against the pharaoh.
First of all, you see the cavalry. There they are in their chariots. The trumpet sounds the order to charge and the horses leap forward. In each of the chariots there are 2 people. One is the charioteer driving towards the enemy, and the other is the warrior with his shield, ready to fight from the chariot or dismount once they engage with the Hittite enemy. The Hittites, they have 3 men in their chariots. They're very eager for the fight, but they're soon going to be very badly disillusioned by Ramses. The Egyptians weren't fighting on their own either. They had mercenaries helping them with their curious horned helmets. They're called the Sardinioi. They were quite vicious as they go into battle with their short, very sharp swords. The Sardinioi give no quarter when they meet the Hittite foe. They slit their throats and then they cut off the hands, the right hand of the dead, so that they can have an accounting afterwards of the enemy slain. It's a curious battle because Ramses almost lost it. He was very impetuous. He tells us in his own words in the inscriptions that we find on the temple walls how he rushed forward solely with his own personal bodyguard, and he was cut off by the Hittites.
It was at this desperate moment that Ramses offered up a prayer to his God. O thou divine Ammon, Lord of eternity, creator and organizer of the world, God who provides all, Lord of all the kingdoms of the earth, see, I am alone. Are you not my father, and I your son? My arm has always done thy will. O divine Ammon, now that I am alone and abandoned by all, I extend to you my hands and my prayer. Are you not stronger than 1,000 archers, than hundreds of heroes?
It was only by fortune and another arm of his army coming up which rescued him. Hittite chariotry soon meet disaster. The horses fall, they stumble in the river, the Egyptians attack them, the Hittites drown in the river, and the bodies float away.
In spite of his great victory, Ramses soon realized that it would be impossible for him to maintain a garrison so far to the north. At the same time, the new Hittite king Hattusilus concluded that sustaining a force in the southern reaches of Syria would be beyond his resources. The respective leaders, therefore, agreed to coexist in peace, and in the year 1259 BC, a historic treaty was drawn up between them. The terms of the treaty were carved on the walls of the Ramesseum and at Karnak, while the Hittites recorded them on clay tablets which survive to this day, making it the first known treaty between countries.
So, in Egyptian record, we read of Ramses' great victory, and it was sealed by his marriage to a Hittite princess. But like most things, there's another side to the coin, another side to the story. And the excavations at Hattusas, the ancient city of Hattusas, now Bogazköy in Turkey, there the Hittite account was found. And according to that, the Hittites won. And it was sealed by the marriage of a Hittite princess to the pharaoh Ramses II. In fact, it seems honours even. Two great nations came together in a clash. They found friendship after a battle, but Ramses II was terribly lucky to get out of it alive.
As we have seen, it was also as a builder that Ramses achieved his greatness. For it was he who built the temples at Karnak, Luxor, Abydos, the Ramesseum, and of course the rock temple of Abu Simbel, remarkable legacies of the ancient Egyptian civilization which draw awestruck visitors from all over the world to this very day.
this magnificent statue of Ramses II is one of the finest portraits of the king extant. It's made of limestone. It's over 20 feet high, weighs over 40 tons. And when it was originally discovered, and that's nearly 200 years ago now, at the beginning of the 19th century by an Italian cavalier, it was in a deep pit. And at the inundation, it was wet and therefore was very difficult to see it. People only used to come here in July and August and go down into the pit to see the marvellous features of the king. He's the great king, and on his belt you can see his cartouche there, several cartouches in fact, which read his name, User Mart Ra. And that, if you translate it, means powerful is the strength, the truth of the sun god Ra. We're looking at the face here of Ramses II, the most powerful king, one of the best known names of all of ancient Egypt. He lived in the 13th century BC. He lived into his 90s. His mummy is still preserved in the Cairo Museum. The inscriptions tell us his great deeds of valor, mention his sons, it is said he had up to 100, the daughters he never bothered to count. And quite recently in the Valley of the Kings, in Kings Valley tomb number 5, excavations have indicated that many of his sons who died before him were actually buried there. This is part of the continuing work of Egyptology, not only in the Valley of the Kings, but in the whole of Egypt, by many, many foreign expeditions, as well as Egyptian Egyptologists. Although we always think of the pharaoh in ancient Egypt, we mustn't forget the ladies. The queens were terribly important because, of course, they carried the royal bloodline. Then you have queens who were the great supporters of their pharaohs, their husbands. And Nefertari, the wife of the great pharaoh Ramses II, was much beloved by her husband. She had a splendid, a marvellously decorated tomb in the Valley of the Queens. And huge statues of her were carved outside the smaller temple at Abu Simbel. So much did Ramses II love his wife.
The smaller of the two magnificent temples of Abu Simbel was dedicated to the goddess Hathor and the pharaoh's favorite wife, Nefertari, who, having attended its dedication ceremony, died the following year in 1254 BC. One breathtaking feature of the great temple, which is built into the side of a mountain, is the 4 gigantic seated figures which represent the king. Guarding the entrance to the temple, the imposing figures measure 18 meters in height. It is amazing to think that the temple was designed to specifications so exacting that at the equinox on the 22nd of February and the 22nd of October, the rising sun shines through the entrance and floods with light 3 of the 4 gods whose statues are seated in the sanctuary 70 meters within the hillside. But why only 3 of the gods? It is because the remaining god, Ptah, was lord of the underworld, and he therefore remains in eternal darkness. While modern-day visitors to Abu Simbel are still filled with wonder at the miracle of its construction, it surprises many to learn of a feat of engineering equally miraculous which was carried out on that site during the 20th century.
In the 1960s, when the great high dam, the Sad El Ali, was being built just to the south of Aswan, it was realized that the rising waters of the lake, which was called Lake Nasser, would engulf the temple. And being sandstone, of course, it would crumble. So it was a great international push, if you like, a consortium as to how to save the temples. Many schemes were put forward, and the one which was followed eventually was to cut the temple and the interior chambers, and there's a temple close by, a smaller temple, dedicated to Nefertari, who was Ramses II's favourite wife. The idea was to remove both temples from the rock like a gigantic jigsaw puzzle. And actually, they were cut very carefully, because sandstone is terribly friable, into these huge blocks. which were then lifted up 300 feet into the air because a new site was made, and it was then rebuilt 200 feet further to the north. So it still stands there. The mountain into which it had been cut has been recreated behind it. It's not only a wonder of ancient engineering, it's a wonder of modern engineering, which has saved one of the great monuments of the world, and the world came together to help save it. And it's not often that one can say this about our cultural inheritance.
Even now, some 3,200 years after his death, Ramses the Great continues to be the focus of speculation and debate for modern-day scholars and historians. For many believe that the pharaoh who features in one of the great biblical events, the Exodus of the Israelites, is indeed Ramses himself. In the Bible, the book of Exodus tells us that the pharaoh had enslaved the entire nation of Israelites to provide Egypt with manpower to build his temples. When God sent Moses to deliver them from their captors, Moses is said to have confronted Pharaoh, "Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, let my people go." And Pharaoh said, "Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice and let Israel go? I know not the Lord, nor will I let Israel go. Wherefore do ye, Moses, let the people from their works get you unto your burdens." Of course, the Bible tells us that Moses eventually led his people to freedom and parted the Red Sea, thus allowing the Israelites to escape from their Egyptian captors. But was Ramses the Great the Israelites' unnamed tormentor? Is it he who features in one of the most famous stories in the Bible?
Ramses is one of the very few Egyptian names which is mentioned by connection in the Bible. They always talk about the city of Ramses. Well, he was the Ramses. The modern scholars would like to connect him with one of the most famous or notorious events that happened in ancient history, and that's the Exodus of our brothers, the Jews from Egypt. And it seems that he's been him. In a way, he fits the bill. If you talk about him and the picture that's given in the Bible, he might have been the person.
If Ramses is the pharaoh in the Bible, then his portrayal is less than flattering. But by his own people, Ramses was accorded almost godlike status. Indeed, Egyptian theology encompassed the belief that when a pharaoh died, he became a god, and part of the burial ceremony incorporated rituals that were said to release the soul of the deceased ruler so that it could fly up to the stars and take its place among the rest of the pantheon.
The pharaoh is a god before he even dies, and we have to think of the processes that go on after death as making him into a different kind of god from the one he was before. During his life, the pharaoh is the living embodiment of Horus, the son of Osiris. When he dies, he actually becomes an Osiris. So maybe we need to think of the whole process as being one of going from one type of divinity to the next. The whole process of moving from one state to the next is seen very literally as a journey, as crossing thresholds, as crossing lakes. And this is made quite clear, for instance, in paintings in the tomb of Thutmose III in the Valley of the Kings, where you see the king sailing across lakes and going through doorways. Now, when you go through these doorways, you need to speak the right magical words, and the king is already apprised of these. And he will successfully complete these transitions and ultimately be reborn as Osiris when he's made that journey.
Along with their concern for the spirit of the deceased, the ancient Egyptians set great store in preserving the mortal remains for use in the afterlife as well. When a person died, the body was mummified, and in the case of a pharaoh, particular care was taken. The word mummy comes from the Arabic word mamiya, meaning bitumen or pitch. After death, the brains of the deceased were extracted from the cranium via the nostrils using a special iron hook, and the skull was rinsed with palm wine and resin. The body was emptied of everything except the heart, rinsed well, and then filled with myrrh and spices. The entire corpse was then soaked in natron, strong salt, or sodium bicarbonate, for between 30 and 50 days, and then finally the mummy was coated with resin that held the bandaging strips of linen that were applied last of all. With this elaborate and painstaking method, all air was completely excluded from the mummy. The internal organs which had been removed were also soaked and then stored in 4 canopic jars. When these were placed next to the sarcophagus in the tomb, the personality of the deceased was believed to return to the physical frame. The whole process of mummification took 70 days. When Ramses the Great died in 1212 BC, he was aged approximately 92. He had reigned as head of his people for some 67 years. As was the custom, the great pharaoh's mummy was laid to rest in a tomb in the Valley of the Kings, together with a fabulous array of artifacts which had been placed there to commemorate his life and for his use in the afterlife.
This is the entrance to the tomb of Ramses II, the great pharaoh of the 19th dynasty. But although we're looking at the entrance, behind it the tomb is very unsafe. It's impossible to get down to the burial chamber. It's never been properly cleared, and it's quite incredible if we think of this king in relation to Tutankhamun, what treasures may have once been in this tomb.
Sadly, owing to the work of tomb robbers over the centuries, only a handful of these remain. In fact, the pilfering of royal graves became so popular that in 1054 BC, Ramses' mummy was removed from its resting place and hidden for its own protection in a cache at Deir el-Bahri. His new resting place was discovered only as recently as 1881. And in 1976, the mighty pharaoh made news by moving yet again.
Ramses II is one of the very, very few kings, to quote an expression by one of my friends, who used the aeroplane to go to Europe. The modern Egyptians always tend to think that if I'm ill seriously, I'd like to be treated in Europe. Ramses was treated in Europe. He was treated in Paris. He had a full treatment, and in fact, when he was met in the airport, he had a regal treatment, which befitted him, and which he would have liked it very much. I'm sure that if Ramses II, as he believed in other life, he must have been a very happy man to fly that way, to be treated there like a king, and when he came back to Egypt, he was again met like a king. So in many ways, he worked hard to earn his notoriety, to earn his fame. We love him, we respect him, but we don't take him seriously most of the time. Sometimes he can over-exaggerate, which can be, in a way, an Egyptian trait. So I like even that in him.
Ramses' most important legacy is as the embodiment of the great dynastic past, as the warrior pharaoh par excellence. And I think a lot of this can be ascribed to the enormous building programs that he sponsored. There are so many monuments of Ramses II, and he also usurped the monuments of so many other people, that his name is literally everywhere. And I think that had an enormous impact in propagating this image of him as the mighty pharaoh, or the mightiest of them all. And I think this image has persisted. Even now, a very common boy's name in Egypt is Ramses, which I think shows the very special place that he has within Egyptian culture.
He encompassed the whole of Egypt. He was the embodiment of it. He pushed its empire wide, its boundaries up through Palestine, modern Israel, up to Syria. He was big in everything, in his stature, in his life. He lived into his 90s. He was one amongst the longest lived of the ancient Egyptian pharaohs. His monuments are still there. They've outlasted so many other things. I suppose he really has deserved it. He was very bombastic. You can't get away from that. You look at the inscriptions on the temples, they're full of his doings. He thought he was great, and subsequent generations have agreed with him.